everyone, and welcome to session 3 of the final day of the Learning Technologies Autumn Forum. I'd just like to start by mentioning that whilst closed captions aren't available on the live of this video, if you'd like to use closed captions, you can do so through your Chrome browser, going to your Chrome settings, accessibility, and then switching the live captions to on. Closed captions will be available on the recording afterwards. But I'm Hannah Frame, and I am chair of today's session. I currently work at St James's Place, which is a financial services company based in the UK. And I work as a technology and innovation manager within L&D, specifically focusing on how we can utilise tech to enable social learning. But I hope you've enjoyed the previous sessions this morning. I very much enjoyed the session from Michelle about why L&D needs to start with quality, solving the video, to start with strategies, not solutions, and with Matt, who focused on quantity and quality and solving the video training dilemma. If you happen to miss these sessions, then you can go back and watch them via the platform. But for this session, I'm delighted to introduce in the first instance, JD Dillon from Axonify. JD is a learning and performance expert working in operations and talent management with dynamic organizations, including the Walt Disney Company, Kaplan, and AMC Entertainment. JD continues to apply his passion for helping people do their best work every day in his roles at Axonify's Chief Learning Officer and founder of LearnGeek. In this session, our speakers will be focusing on quiet consolidating, how to streamline your tech stack with minimal disruption. JD, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Hi, everybody. As introduced, I'm JD, Chief Learning Officer at Axonify, and I'm excited to join you today as part of the Learning Technologies Autumn Forum, because you see, I have something very exciting to tell you. This session will include 0 slides. No slides at all. Aren't we just a little slided out at this point? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm the biggest PowerPoint fanatic there is out there, but sometimes you just need to talk through some big ideas rather than figure out how to make them look right in slide format. So that's what we're going to do for the next hour. We're going to chat. Think of this as an episode of your favorite podcast, perhaps my podcast, In the Know, available to download on your favorite podcast app. But more important than the lack of slides is the topic for our conversation with my special guest today. We're going to be discussing technology consolidation, how you can get the most value from your tech stack and simplify the learning and support experience for the people that you're trying to help within your organization. So I'd like to start out by asking a question of everyone here, if you've joined us live. And if you're watching on demand later, feel free to just shout your answers out loud. I'm sure no one in the office will mind. But my question for everyone here for the chat is, how many LMS platforms does your company have right now? Drop a number in the chat. And if you're not exactly sure, just kind of give us your best guess. How many LMS platforms does your company have right now? As the answers roll in, you'll notice that if you do research on this topic, the answer varies for the average organization. Generally speaking, depending on what report you read, the average organization has somewhere between 3 and 11 active learning platforms. And before I got into technology, I worked in L&D with Disney in their parks and resorts and with Kaplan in their higher education contact centers. And in both cases, we had one corporate LMS that we use across the enterprise. But just because we had one LMS, one technology focused on learning and owned by L&D, it didn't mean we only had one learning technology, because we had Confluence as our knowledge base, and we had SharePoint as an intranet, and we had Slack and Google Meet and a variety of other tools people use to learn and solve problems in their everyday work. So when you expand the definition of learning technology to include these types of tools, it's easy to see why workplace learning and support gets so complicated so quickly. I mean, where am I supposed to go for help? And how do I access the right tool as part of my workflow? Can I consume this kind of content on this kind of device? And what value am I going to get by using these different tools, especially when I have so many tools I already use on the job and I have an overflowing task list? And then on the L&D side, it takes time and resources to administer multiple platforms and the content housed within those platforms. And when you have different systems being run by different teams and different departments in different regions, things get inconsistent and the user experience suffers. And then there's always pressure from the CFO to reduce spending, while the CTO wants to limit admin complexity and any kind of tech-related risk to the business. And within all of this complexity and confusion that often exists in enterprise tech, there's one undeniable fact that I think we have to acknowledge. One platform can't do everything. And remember, I'm a tech vendor. Vendors are great at saying their platforms can do everything that you might possibly need, right? And I mean, there are a lot of platforms that can do a lot of different things, but the push for doing more with less that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years, I have found has really driven organizations to consolidate their technology stacks, make sure they're getting value from all of their different technology investments. And at the same time, it's pushed technology companies to expand their offerings and look for new ways to provide value in a consolidated ecosystem. I mean, I can speak for Axonify. That's why you see us not only expanding our learning capabilities, but also adding tools like communication tools and task management and recognition features and digital assistants, because we're looking for new ways to add value to our audience, which in our case is frontline workers. Now, organizations are looking to simplify the user experience, make it easier for people to find the resources they need, and by doing that, maximize the value of their investments in training and technology. But the big question is, where do you get started if you're trying to solve for this complexity and potential confusion within your technology stack? If you have multiple LMS platforms and various point solutions littered across the organization, how do you decide what stays and what goes? And most of all, how do you make workplace learning make sense to employees who are just trying to do their best every day? Well, today I'd like to share an answer from an experienced technologist and learning professional who supports tens of thousands of employees around the world within the complex, highly regulated biopharmaceutical industry. So in the chat, if you could please give a warm learning tech welcome to Joe Ritter, Director of HR Operations, Learning, and Global Service Delivery with MSD. Joe, how are you doing today?
Good.
Thanks so much for joining me. Now, I have lots of questions that I'm going to ask Joe about his company's technology strategy and how they've managed to consolidate and simplify their digital learning experience. But I also want to make sure we answer all of your questions out there. So if you want to, drop questions for Joe in the chat as we go, and we'll save some time at the end of our conversation to respond to as many as possible. And then you can also reach out to me anytime on LinkedIn if you have a question after today. I'm always happy to help. But Joe, I know a lot of people are probably familiar with your organization, at least by name, whether they know MSD, maybe some people know Merck, but I want to be sure people understand the scope of the workforce you support. So could you give us a breakdown of your organization? How many people does your L&D function support? Where are those people? And then what kind of work do they do?
Sure. So we are a large biopharma company. We are global. We have about 80,000 employees with another 40,000 contingent workers or temporary staff on hand. So we have about 130,000 people we have to kind of service. Again, like I said, we are global. We are in, I think, 60 plus markets across the globe, manufacturing sites across the globe, research centers. I think that's about it in terms of different types of in terms of our reach, if you will. And then in terms of who we have to service, we have the research labs and that part of the house. We have our manufacturing, we have our sales and marketing force, and then what we call our global shared services, which is basically everybody else behind the scenes keeping things running, like IT, finance, our group, and HR, that type of thing. So.
And then what role do you play in supporting this workforce as part of the L&D function?
So I'm in our HR operations team, and I'm under what we call the HR solutions and strategy group. And we're basically, my major role is overseeing the entire learning technology stack at the company. So understanding what we have out there, how it's working, making sure it's working, and kind of working with our global L&D learning development group to help them realize their vision. So I kind of have multiple people I have to work with between IT, L&D, HR. So it's kind of working across those different groups to help deliver our technology platforms.
I imagine someone in the chat right now is asking the question, how do I have a better relationship with my IT department? So we might want to talk about that a little bit later. But could you break down for us, how is L&D structured within MSD to support that global distributed workforce?
Sure. They have a number of different teams. So they have what we call the client-facing teams. So they work with each of the different divisions within the company, and they're primarily your performance consulting. So they're having those discussions with the clients, understanding their needs. Those come back into the center, which we actually consolidated the center, just to give everybody some background, about 10 years ago or so. So previously we were all disbanded across the different divisions. They pulled them all together around 2014 or so. So that's why I'm explaining a little bit why we have the groups that are out there with customer facing and then pulling in into the center. Once they come in, there's a group that does the creation. So your content creation group that does the design and development of that. And then we have, for the most part, that's the majority of those groups over there in L&D. And then just to kind of help everybody else understand, so there's extended groups as well. So as different processes and whatnot become more standardized, we have an HR operations team that supports learning. So we have a learning operations group that's kind of my sister group. So they handle all the day-to-day interactions. So anything that has to go on in the LMS, so any type of content uploads, assignments, curricula creation, all that kind of stuff goes through that team. And I'm the technology component, so I can kind of triangulate between the two groups, understand what they want to do, like what the L&D team wants to do, and then we get it set up so that the learning operations team and the company can actually use that. So I'm just trying to follow the PADI model, if you will. So the implementation part pretty much goes all through the learning operations team, and there's some delivery between our global learning operation, or global learning delivery, and our learning operations team both handle some of the delivery components.
Gotcha. I know that's another popular topic of conversation in L&D, and it kind of swings back and forth in terms of decentralized, centralized, decentralized, centralized, in terms of what the right model is to support a distributed and complicated workforce. Another topic of conversation for potentially another day, because the focus today of our conversation is the technology side of consolidation, making sure you get the most out of your tech investments while also making sure that people can find and access the training and support they need. And we already talked about how many tools are often used within organizations to support learning and development. And lots of people are dealing with inconsistency and complexity within these tech stacks. And at the same time, they also have jobs to do. So there's training to get done and metaphorical fires to put out. So often improving learning tech strategy struggles to get to the top of a priority list. So I'm curious, why did you decide that it was important to evolve your technology strategy at MSD?
I think two reasons. One was around the employees. The other one was around the efficiency of our systems. I went through the Sigma program here at the company, so I have a Lean Six Sigma background. So from the efficiency perspective, when I came into this role about 5 years ago, I saw how disjointed things were. Like, a lot of what I inherited was not very efficient. And then having been at the company for over 30 years, I also know what it's like from an employee perspective and trying to do anything in that space. So when I came in and kind of looked to see what was going on, you could look to see, like, from an employee perspective, they had no idea where to go. It was it fostered a culture of just tell me what I have to take, I'll take it, and then I'll go do my job. Because there's a lot of mandatory training that everybody has to take, but it wasn't necessarily fostering a learning culture, if you will, other than just tell me what to do. And so when I sat down and really looked at where the tech stack was, you could see if you put the employee in the center, they had to know where to go and look for things. And then that's kind of where my Lean Six Sigma brain kicked in. I'm like, this is very inefficient from an employee perspective. You always have to remember, okay, where did I last see that? Was that on a website? Was that in an email? Was that in the LMS? Was that in this system? So taking that a step further and then looking at it from the other side of the house of, okay, now I'm behind the scenes. How do I make this better for an employee? I started taking that into account and say, okay, how do we take the employee and put them in the center of our technology stack and then have the technology around them so that they don't have to search. They just kind of have it at their fingertips. So that's kind of the vision of where I wanted to kind of go with when I came in, I was like, then again, assessing the situation, I was like, okay, this is where we really need to be moving towards.
And that's an interesting point about the connection between kind of simplicity of technology experience and engagement with those platforms and with development opportunity. Because like you said, if everything's a maze or everything's feels like you're solving a puzzle just to be able to find the opportunity to be able to either solve a problem or find opportunities to develop yourself, what are the odds you're going to dedicate the time and effort and energy to it versus when it's a simpler experience, then we're having a different conversation about motivation and engagement, and it's the better conversation to have. Right. So you painted a bit of the before picture in terms of what you were introduced to when you came into the role. Could you tell us a little bit more about how many different platforms and different types of tools were out there in the organization, and how did it get to this point?
Right. So, great question. So we worked with an outside consultant to kind of get a take of our existing technologies, if you will. They came back with roughly, and again, it was a survey, about 120 different or more technologies out there in the learning space. So it wasn't necessarily all MSs. It was just, it could have been anything. It could have been a survey tool. It could have been a little platform to do coaching and mentoring. It could be any of those types of things. But again, it was 120 different, and then some, that were out there. So we really started taking that into account, looking at what they were, categorizing them into various buckets, if you will. And then I also looked, the funny thing too is some of our main technologies also grew up kind of organically. So with Axonify, we had the Axonify platform, but we had 4 different instances. We had all these different various contracts out there. So it was like, okay, we can't even use this platform because not everybody has access to it. So what we started to do is look at, okay, what are the main platforms or components of our overall tech stack? Because as you mentioned earlier, we got to this point as well, there is no silver bullet, right? There is no one platform that's going to do everything for us. So it's really, how do you patchwork them together, and which ones do you patchwork together? So we started there and kind of looked at what are the major ones that we had access to. And then again, as we bucketed through the 120, started working with the groups that had those contracts, said, oh, did you know we have this over here that does whatever it might be. Let's wind you down off of this and then get you scaled up into here. So we had to go through that a lot. And again, being such a large company, and people have their own budgets, people were able to go out and kind of buy whatever they wanted. So you're dealing with folks in India or Japan or China, the EU, wherever. It doesn't matter where we were. Everybody had their own thing. And it was just, they want to get the job done, like you said before. And I get that. But the other thing too is we want to make sure that we're saving money and not just spending a lot of money on technology that we already have. So that was kind of one of the bigger drivers of another reason why we started doing this, was really trying to consolidate the spend in this space as well. I'm not sure if that helps answer that question, but okay.
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier, you made a reference to putting the employee at the center.
Okay.
And I'm curious, how much of a vision did you define before you went down the path of, okay, we have 160 platforms. We're going to consolidate this down to a more manageable number of tools. What was kind of the guiding principle or vision for what you were trying to accomplish as you set out to consolidate the tech stack?
So, like you said, I try to put it at the center, but also looked at it from an employee perspective as to where are they day to day? Like, where are they minute to minute in a day doing their work? And when we took that look, we started to say, okay, here are the main components that they're typically in. They're not typically in the LMS unless they have to. So we really started looking at what are the main technologies that we're using that are not learning, and trying to say, okay, how do we integrate or weave these other learning technology platforms underneath those to surface it where they are, right? Because it still is a big thing. Like I was going to say, it's always we always say, let's bring the learning to the employee, to the learner where they are at the right time and all that kind of stuff, and getting it in the flow of work. Well, in order to get something into the flow of work, you have to look at where they're doing the work, right? So that's when we started looking at that. We are like a Microsoft shop, so we do have a lot of Microsoft products, but there's also other components that we have out there. And then we started looking at the majority of our technologies to see, okay, how do we integrate them in? Can we integrate them in? What are the better systems that we have that lend themselves to integration, right? So it's not that we can't do integrations with systems, but it was really looking at, again, on the back end, what's the cost of doing an integration, or what's the value in doing this? So taking that step, those two components of, okay, here's where the employees are working, and here are the different systems that we have. How do we kind of layer them underneath each other? That kind of helped drive the strategy a little bit in terms of, which technology stayed, which ones didn't, and then going even further to start saying, okay, what does that employee experience feel like or look like in the background?
My favorite part of your answer was how you addressed the concept. We love the buzzword learning in the flow of work as an industry. And I found that we can make that word mean literally anything, depending on what type of content, what type of work, what type of technology we happen to be talking about in a given moment. Right. But I specifically enjoyed the fact that the way you connected it to understanding how work is done, right? So regardless how you define learning in the flow of work, I think it's essential for us to understand how people spend their time, where they physically do their job, and then what tools they're touching as part of that job, because allows us to make a more informed decision about where we can help, right? Where we can insert the right type of support, whether it be training, whether it be access to information. So that understanding of how work is done, and the fact that in most organizations, even if the size of MSD or you're a mid-sized retailer somewhere, how work is done varies across the organization in different types of roles, in different regions, in different locations. So understanding where are the commonalities in terms of how work is done, and then where are there differences, when you compare someone who works in a corporate office to someone who works in a frontline capacity, where are those differences that require us to make adjustments to how we kind of architect the support infrastructure around that person, which I think is the path we're on in our story. But I want to come back to the one central platform question. So you said at the beginning of the story, there was not a goal to get to, okay, we're going to go over 140, 160 tools to one tool. This feels daunting, but maybe also just not the right thing to do based on capability of technology and what people need. But I'm curious around the whole, okay, we can't get to one. Did everyone agree with that sentiment? Yeah. Was IT saying, or was everyone on the same page?
No, we're definitely on the same page. I have a really good relationship with our IT house. We're kind of hand in glove. So I have a very close relationship with them. Really understand, again, part of my job, I have multiple folks I have to work with. So I have objectives from IT. I have objectives from the L&D side of the house, and also on HR operations. So I do have to kind of weave all that together. But I do have, it was one of the first things I did was establish a really good relationship with our IT folks. So they understood it, they get it. We have the folks I work with are HR IT. So they really do understand the HR space. They're not just your generic. And I'm lucky that we're in a large company that we can afford to have multiple IT groups and multiple teams that help support the learning space. But working with them, it's not so much the number. Yes, it is some of the number of systems they do have. We do have discussions around do we really need another one of these? It usually the answer is no, but sometimes yes, there is a niche platform that we might need because of the certain capability we're trying to bring in. But I also follow some of their philosophy of we need to get every dollar out of the system. So we're not just buying this for this one thing, and having those discussions with them up front. They appreciated that. Okay, we see you're coming down from we always said, it's definitely not 120, but it's definitely not one. It's somewhere in between. What's the right number of systems that we need? And I think we're kind of down to five to seven major systems, and there's some other little smaller ancillary ones, but those are kind of the core of our tech stack. And then there's a handful that we're still trying to get in, but working with them on that, and then working with IT in terms of once we do this and get these down, how do we sustain it? Right. So the other thing too is you don't want to just once and done. This is really fun. Oh, let's get rid of all these things, and then everything starts creeping back a year later because you take your eye off the ball. So worked very closely with our IT colleagues on a process that we put in place to really limit what people could buy once this was done. So that was another part of not negotiations with them, but our discussions to say okay, if we're going to do this and these are the right systems and the right platforms, how do we make sure that we don't get that scope creep again, or the technology creep? So we did put a process in place with them so that as requests came in, they were all funneled to to myself and to, we have an enterprise architect that kind of oversees the IT space over there from an enterprise perspective. So the two of us kind of pair together to look like, do we need this? Is this something that's already out there? And we have those kind of discussions too. So that was, I think, working with IT, that was part of it, was truly understanding and showing, here's the value in the system. That was the other thing too, of understanding who's using this. Like, we have 5 people using this, or do we have like the company using the system? So that was part of it. And then also having that discussion of, okay, how do we stop this from happening in the future? We also had to bring procurement in. So there was a good deal of groups in the company that we were kind of working together to fix that process, so that people just couldn't go out and, I got $10, I'm gonna go buy another platform type of, not $10, but you know what I mean? At the end of the year, it's that time of year, everybody's got money left over in their budget. What can we go spend it on? How do we stop them from really spending it on learning technologies that we already have, type of thing?
I hope a lot of people picked up solid tips there with regards to working with IT, because of how often I hear people talk about, well, IT won't let us, or IT is not available to support. Because again, IT, a lot going on, mandate to support, protect the company. And often IT resources get pulled towards external facing, customer facing initiatives over internal initiatives in a lot of cases. So you emphasize something I always make a joke about. I always say to L&D and HR people, that, after our conversation today, the next thing you should do is go buy our IT department lunch. And I'm not really joking, but it's just, it's to emphasize the idea that, like you said, you're leveraging a relationship and a familiarity with the value that you're providing in order to do the project that you need their support with, as opposed to trying to build that relationship and introduce the value as part of the project, which creates a lot of the friction or the kind of limited understanding or the pushback that I find a lot of people see from the IT department, and creates that kind of L&D versus IT thing that happens a lot in organizations.
I'm kind of the no guy at the moment, so maybe that's why I have a good relationship.
You've taken it.
I take the brunt of it. Yeah.
There you go. So you're the person that organizationally people need to buy lunch. You mentioned it earlier a bit when we talked about the fact that different teams might have their favorite or preferred tools. Right. And when you're looking at consolidating and centralizing a learning and development function, you might have to disappoint some people, or get them into maybe there's a bit of a political battle.
Yes.
In some cases, around what people prefer. Like, so how do you manage that when you're trying to figure out, based on that vision, the experience you're trying to craft for the employee, and you're trying to decide what stays and what goes and where the pieces fit? How do you overcome that challenge?
I think there was 2 different components to that, probably other things, but the 2 major ones where I think were, you said, like, to your point, try to get someone off their platform and onto a different one. Part of it was, okay, well, and I hate using this word because everybody cringes at it, but what are your requirements? But getting away from what are requirements, it's really more of what do you want it to do? And kind of like, I took a course before in a long time ago, and they were like, doesn't matter what they call it, just like put ing on the end. I wanted to be able to do like, I don't know, polling, or those are real words, but it was basically,
if it's a verb, it feels good.
Exactly. It's basically turning things into verbs, and getting them out of like, well, I needed to do X, Y, and Z with it. Like, I don't need the technology requirements. I just need, like, what do you want it to do? And you get it into that discussion with them, and you say, well, okay, this does everything you want it to do, or it does 80, 90%. Is that good enough? And then you have that other discussion around, okay, from an employee perspective or from a company perspective or value perspective, it makes more sense to move you off to that platform and over here. And then once you start to get a little bit of the agreement, they kind of have a little bit more of that, get the emotion taken out of the discussions, and really just kind of say, like, look, here are the different platforms. Here's what you want them to do. This one, they both do basically the same thing. Then you kind of work with them to say, okay, you help us on this. And then I found over the years that if you bring someone in to help you with the project, they become a little bit more of a cheerleader for you. So they kind of help you with the org readiness, or the change, if you will, and that they're helping you get the other system ready, or help you understand what the configurations need to be, or how the data needs to move over. And then they go back and they kind of help get that group on board for you, type of thing. So this way you have them in your corner, and they're like, yeah, this isn't a bad system, it does the same things. It's not me telling them, it's actually someone there, one of their own colleagues telling them that, versus Joe over in HR telling them what to do.
Joe in HR. I've always found you're more successful in any type of transformational effort when you focus on building champions and heroes instead of trying to become the champion or hero, right? Because almost always people would prefer to hear why something is worth their time and effort from someone who does the same kind of job, kind of understands their day-to-day reality and can articulate that story, less about something that the learning and development or HR department wants and more about the value it's going to provide us when it comes to what we're trying to accomplish and the problems we're trying to solve. And I think right now, we're going to get to this point, but right now we're in the midst of another meaningful digital transformation in the world, including in the workplace, where I think we're trying to find that connection between that technology conversation and meaningful value to the problems I'm trying to solve in my day-to-day work. But we're heading to that. We're also heading to the end game, kind of we talked about painted the before picture. We're about to paint the current state picture. Before we get there though, I do want to ask, were there any particular big challenges that you ran into in the process of trying to consolidate a tech stack this large and dynamic within your organization?
We're still running.
How much time do we got?
Yeah, exactly. I know. So I don't even say finished, but we finished the overall project just about a year ago, and we're still dealing with some of the issues. So our hypercare is a little bit more of a longer hypercare than we expected on certain things. So, for instance, as I was saying, we're kind of consolidating 4 instances of Axonify into one. The technical component of moving everybody off, like all their programs, everything into one instance was the easy part. But since things grew up organically, we had the same issue with our main LMS, in that it was our essential HR LMS, but everybody and their brother was able to use it without any standards. So there's all sorts of stuff in there, and it is a mess. I remember I read an article once about your LM mess, MESS. And I was like, yeah, it's us.
I've never heard that, but that's a really good one. Yeah,
I thought that was going to, I was like, that's clever. But that's been a bigger challenge is, okay, yes, the tech part was the easy part. Now it's, okay, how do we get them, okay, you've all been using this for whatever you've been using it for the past 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Now we're all coming into one. And this is, I think, the challenge from an HR perspective and even L&D, in that we have to work with the customers to really say, okay, no, we are putting a standard in place. This is how we're going to be using this moving forward. I understand this is what you were doing previously. And that's a challenge, because that's trying to change. It's not a one size fits all change plan, because it's everybody, all these different projects or all these different groups were doing things differently. And now they're coming under the one group or under the one solution. And as we were explaining what they were going to get out of the solution, in terms of, okay, it's going to reduce how many people you have to do this thing. It's going to, you're going to reduce this in terms of your spend. It's going to be able to help us integrate with other platforms, because right now we've got 4 different things. You can't integrate all 4. It's going to improve single sign-on, like all those types of things. So like, oh, that sounds great. And then they get in, they're like, it's maybe not as much as it's not as great as I thought, type of thing. So there is still a lot of work that we have to do in that space, and really continue to help them understand, here's the vision, here's where we're trying to go, here's why we're trying to do that. And it's going to be long, it's going to be messy, it's going to take a while. And then it's just, you got to kind of keep at it with that. So I think that was one of the bigger challenges that we've had to face with, or the bigger hurdles, if you will, and trying to get everybody together and get the technologies under, like, into one, like they're separate components type of thing, and kind of get everybody over there.
So are you telling me in a digital transformation project, the technology is actually the easier part, the behavior change is the hard part?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
There it is. Surprise, everybody. So you mentioned it, the fact that technology strategies constantly evolve, technology is constantly evolving. There's not really an end to this story. There's just a current state. So could you paint that picture for us, because we're not able to show the user experience, but could you paint the picture of what's the employee experience like with digital learning today after this technology consolidation?
It's getting better. Is it where we need it to be? No. And that's why it's kind of our vision. It's kind of where we're trying to go. As I always tell my team, it's better. It's always want to be better than we were yesterday. It doesn't have to be perfect, as long as it's better than where we were. It's still a little messy, but I think it's getting better as we're moving forward. So from an employee perspective, we've done a couple of things too, which people are probably going to cringe, but we're moving from one LMS into 2. There's a reason behind that, because we have a validated system. We have a skills platform with that we need our other training associated, our non-validated training over. And so that's not helping at the moment because we're still in the midst of moving things over. But from an employee perspective, I have gotten a lot of good feedback and that the newer platforms that we're moving into are a lot more user-friendly. So that's the other thing too to keep in mind is where are these platforms going, so that you're not trying to build to today, you're trying to build to where they're trying to go as well. So our platforms are getting more, like I said, more user-friendly. They look a little bit more modern, up to date. They're also able to find learning a little bit more in the flow of work. So we've been able to integrate between our different platforms. So like I said, we're in Microsoft at the moment. They can find things in Teams. They can find things through the various search components across that. So we are doing different integrations between our HCM platform, our LMS, and our day-to-day work. So again, from the employee, it's getting better. They don't have to find all these different websites or internal websites that they have to go find things. Everything is, we've started integrating all the catalogs into the system so they can go one place and find, okay, here's all the different third-party content that we have out there, instead of, like I said, like which website was that on? And then, like I said, they can also find it. They can start finding it in the flow of work because we've started opening up the catalog through the back end, through different integrations, so that an employee can really just like search for it in their work, and it just, okay, here's the 10 different courses on Gen AI that I want to take. So they can kind of find that where they are, as opposed to like, okay, let me go to the LMS, let me go in and find, like, they can just do it right from their seat in whatever they might be working in at the time. So we are getting closer to that vision that we had of thinking about the employee in the center, and how do you get the learning to them much easier instead of them having to go find what they needed.
So if I summarize, tell me if I'm correct in terms of the kind of where the experience is today. So you have, I believe you have a hub and spokes model to a certain degree, right? Where there's a centralized place that people can go in order to access learning experiences or content that might be housed in those multiple platforms. And at the same time, you've made that kind of curated catalog of resources available to be discovered via like Microsoft Teams or other enterprise search or kind of operational tools, so that everything's kind of pointing in the direction of the kind of integrated hub experience. But then maybe are people experiencing the actual learning experience or the content experience in those platforms, but they don't have to worry about that because they're all finding it through a centralized catalog and a centralized experience to a large degree.
A little bit, yeah. So yes, we do have the centralized hub where people can go. That's very useful, I find, for newer employees that are coming in. They like, oh, okay, here's the information. For those of us who are a little long in the tooth and have been here for 30 plus years, I kind of know where to, like, it doesn't hurt that I'm in the technology space, but I kind of know where to go, or I don't necessarily always want to go there. So there are, like, I'd say there's multiple places for them to go, but it gets back to that in the flow of work. I just get it where I am. So they don't necessarily have to, like, if I'm working in Microsoft Teams, or if I'm in our HCM, or if I'm in, to your point, like in this thing, it's all the same. So it doesn't really matter where I am. They can get to whatever they're looking for. But we do have that one hub where, especially for newer folks, because they come in, they're like, okay, what do I do? I think it's very helpful for new employees, because at least it gives them a place that they can jump into and say, like, explore around. And then once they get the lay of the land and they start to understand how things work, then they'll start realizing, oh, everything's all that's right here. It's over here. It's over here. Or I just type for it down below. So it is starting to get it a little bit more into that, depending on how you define flow of work, is a little bit more in your flow of work. So instead of always having to go to, like, we have that central hub, it's always there, but you don't have to always go there. If you don't, like, there's multiple entry points depending on where you are, but there is always that front door that people can go to if they need to, type of thing.
Got it.
So you mentioned, yeah, because I don't want to give the impression that we're forcing 120 something people towards one hub. It is there as a resource, but we're trying to get that more of wherever you are, you have access to your learning.
I think that's a meaningful balance to speak to, because I know a lot of people talk about the words front door for learning, right? Yeah. And from my perspective, the front door for learning is the way you do your job today and our ability to flex and accommodate that versus, like you said, try to push everyone through an experience that may or may not make sense based on the fact that some people sit at a desk all day and sit in front of a computer like this, and I can easily move between browser tabs and go to various different types of applications, where someone else who's in a manufacturing facility that maybe is limited to using a mobile device screen as most of what they do has a meaningfully different version of what available in the flow of work means. So finding that balancing act, I think, is critical versus defaulting to a front door that I think makes more sense to us than it does the people that we're trying to help in that regard.
Exactly, yeah. Because we have like three major buckets. Like we have folks in the labs, we have, to your point, folks on the manufacturing floor, we have sales reps out in the field. Like they don't, like it's an office job, right? They're not, to your point, sitting like you and I in front of a computer all day. So having that, helping them get what they need, where they need it is a lot, is part of the challenge, but it's also part of the vision of, okay, like you can't just always have that one hub because it's not necessarily working for them in the flow of work, if you will.
Yeah. You mentioned positive feedback from employees to this point. I'm curious, from a value proposition perspective, what value have you recognized as the L&D function, and what value has the business recognized when it comes to the consolidation that you've executed?
I think the biggest value, that maybe not from an employee perspective, but from a company perspective, is the reduced spend. So I think we reduced it by almost up to $2 million, I think, in spend over the past year or two, in terms of just consolidating and getting into the main systems, which is nothing to sneeze at. I'd like to have that kind of cash laying around, but I think we all would. But I think that was a big, like, in terms of the value to the company, I think that's definitely part of the value. From an employee perspective, I think they are starting to see the value, like I said, in terms of getting what they need quicker, right? So they don't have to go find things, because that, again, when I was in the Lean Six Sigma world, that's all wasted time and effort, is trying to just find something, right? You're searching for stuff. If you already know where to go, to your point with the hub, or I know I can find this in any of these 3, 4, 5 major platforms that we're working in day to day, I think that starts to build in their head, like, oh, this is kind of easy. It's a lot easier than it was in the past. I don't have to go looking in 6, 7 different areas just to find the one thing I was looking for. I can just find it wherever I am.
So we've almost managed to get through a technology conversation without talking about AI, which might actually be illegal nowadays. So I have to ask an AI related question.
Yes.
So how do you think going through a process like this, basically taking an inventory of your digital technology stack, your digital learning experience, why is this important for organizations to do as part of the introduction of or transition towards a more AI-driven technology experience?
I think it seems like all my answers have two parts, but I think there's definitely two components to it. I think the one component is the fact that we are consolidating and having more standards put in place helps from a Gen AI perspective, right? So the better our systems are, the better, more consistent our system, not even just the systems, but the data in our systems, the more consistent that is going to help it tremendously within the Gen AI space. So I think it's something we're doing a lot in that space right now. And we've been finding that the newer components that we have, now that we've introduced a different, like the standardized components, that the data that we're putting into them is more standardized. It's helping with the Gen AI because it's not looking at like just a mess of information. It's very consistent in that, like, we put an AI in place last year to look at our SCORM files and create titles and descriptions for them consistently against our standards. So this way, a human doesn't have to do that. They can look at it, make sure it's correct, but it kind of puts a little bit more rigor behind the data that's going into these systems. So I think that's the first component, is making sure that your data is as consistent and standard as possible so that the Gen AI can make sense of it. And then I think the other component is along those lines, and that the more consolidated your systems are, the better you can leverage. Like, and again, like I mentioned before, we are looking at our systems that have Gen AI or machine learning components in them and where they're trying to go. So the more we are consolidated, the better off those platforms are going to be, because if you're trying to, right now, it's a messy space, but the more you have it consolidated, the better that machine learning or AI is going to be, because it's going to be able to look at everything across the board for the entire company versus we're going to do a little bit over in this one, we're going to do a little bit in this one. So the more consolidated, I think from a Gen AI perspective, or like I said, machine learning definitely helps in that space, because I think in the end, it provides better output for your employee, right? So that if they know they can go to the one spot, everything's flowing in through there, it's collecting all that data, the Gen AI is going to learn, or the machine learning is going to learn, and it's going to provide better outputs for the employee at the end of the day.
And simply stated, the last thing that we want to do is create a world where every employee has 5 different digital assistants.
Exactly.
And they're all feeding from different data sources and knowledge bases. And now we're creating kind of the worst version of the world, like the before picture that we painted earlier. So I think even if your organization's in a place where you're not in full adoption mode, I know there's been a lot of conversation as part of this event in terms of where we are in terms of AI maturity and understanding as an industry. So even if you're still in that phase of not exactly sure where the value is, not exactly sure what our organizational guidelines are going to be around the adoption of this type of technology, doing the cleanup effort, I think it's timely right now when it comes to both what's your current digital experience, how are you using your different tools right now, and then also the content and data side of this, which is, I always make the reference that if you took an amazing digital assistant, you plugged it into your SharePoint site, what would happen, right? Would it be able to understand that information that's available in SharePoint, or is it not going to be able to parse the difference between, well, that's a PowerPoint presentation from 2007, and this one's from 2014, and this one's from 2024. Which one's right? Which one's real, right? So are we doing the cleanup and kind of the preparation necessary to be able to really take advantage of the next evolution of technology when it comes to conversations around consolidation and kind of consistency and process and these types of things? Before we head over to questions, I do want to ask one more question, which is, at no point in our discussion have you said the words, well, this is easy. So implementing new technology is always a challenge. Yeah. But I find that unwinding years of legacy and balancing shifting priorities and building a new experience, I find that's more difficult in a lot of cases. So if someone out there is thinking, I'm in a similar place, maybe it's not 140 tools, but I have a complicated tech stack that's taking a lot of effort, time, and expense from the organization and L&D, and it's also not the right fit experience for the employee, where would you recommend someone start when it comes to their own technology consolidation?
I would definitely start with where you want to go in terms of like, what's your vision? What are you trying to achieve? I would also start with, it gets back to, I think we were talking about before in terms of your cheerleaders, your champions, find the right sponsors in the organization, because you won't be able to do this on your own. You really need that support from up top to run cover for you, whatever you're going to need. Make sure you have a solid business case as to what you're trying to do, where you're trying to go, what's the value to the company, but also so you can explain it to the senior leaders so they understand what you're trying to do, so they can help support that effort, which I had tremendous amount of support during this effort over the past couple of years. And that if we ran into some resistance or one of those groups didn't want to do it like what we were trying to do, you kind of run up the chain and say, look, we've tried our best. They're not open to what we're trying to suggest. We need your support. And they kind of come in and they help. Okay, this is why we're doing this. This is all part of this overall program that we're trying to do. So I think those different components, I think, will definitely help. Kind of like I said before, like the technology is not easy, but it is one of the easier parts, because the people part's the messy part. And I think having truly understanding what it is you're trying to do, where you're trying to go, what's the value, like that's the one thing we always try to, like, what's our value? Why are we trying to do this? It's not just because it's something to keep people busy. It's really something for, what's the value to the company? And then getting your senior leader support, I think, is huge. I think having those two make it a little easier, or make it more possible. But it's never going to be easy, that's for sure.
Got it. Thanks again so much, Joe, for sharing your insights and experience today. I want to bring Hannah back on to see if we have any questions in the chat that people would like you to address. And if you haven't asked your questions yet, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll spend the rest of our time picking up those answers. So Hannah, over to you.
That just so interesting. I've learned so much, definitely around building a better relationship with the IT department. I'm going to take them out for lunch next week. But thank you for that. Quite a lot of questions coming through on the chat. One of which links like really nicely with a session that was the other day around proving impact. So how do you measure kind of like the return of investment on your technology ecosystems, especially when you've got multiple ones going on?
I mean, the biggest one, I think, the metric that we typically look at is how many people are actually engaged with the platform. So looking to see how many interactions, and then you kind of look at that versus, okay, how much we're paying for it, gives you a little bit more of that return on investment of, okay, how many employees versus what we're paying for this. That kind of gives you a little bit more of that impact in terms of, is this platform worth it? And we have looked, that's one of the things we've looked at when we were doing the consolidation. There were a couple of platforms where we had maybe 2-3% of the population using it. And I'm like, why are we paying this much money for something that a small portion of the employee population is using? So we use that to kind of part of the consolidation. It was a nice platform, but part of the consolidation, we got rid of it. So that's typically, at least from my perspective, a kind of dollars and cents guy. I do look at it from that perspective. And again, that's the value, but also from an L&D perspective, having those discussions with them, like, why, like, what are we doing with this platform? How does this fit in with your vision and their objectives? So you kind of look at both of those together to see, okay, should we continue with this one, or should we pull the plug on it and move on to a different platform?
Thank you, Joe. Another one that's come through from Andrew just now was around, he mentioned, I use an RSS feed reader to seek out new and interesting topics. And one of the cues is digital transformation in headlines. It's produced 150 plus stories in 3 days, explaining how to make it work in a range of industries and professions. Why do we still get this wrong?
I'm sorry, what? You were breaking up a little bit. Could you?
I think the question is.
Oh no, apologies. JD, do you have the question there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of conversation around digital transformation, right? It's a nonstop buzzword and conversation in the space. So the question becomes, philosophically, why do you think we still get it wrong? Right? Why are we still trying to figure out, especially in learning and development, the relationship between technology and helping people do their jobs? Why is this hard?
I don't know if anybody's like this answer. I think we rely too much on the technology to solve our problems, if I had to be honest. The technology can only take you so far. I think I saw some stats a year ago or 2 years ago where like technology is like maybe 10% of the solution. The rest of it's in terms of the content, the development of it, what the employee's trying to get out of it. And I think that's the challenge, I think, in this space, and that there's always something new coming out in the technology space. It looks great, but what's the true value in using it? Why do we need to bring it? Like, and taking that step back and really thinking, like, do I really need this technology? What's it solving for? And I think that kind of answers. I hope that answers the question a little bit. I think it is too much of chasing that shiny penny. Well, that'll solve my problem. It's not. I don't think the technology is going to solve the problem per se. It's more of it can help be part of the solution, but it can't always be 100% your solution.
And I would add just a kind of a personal comparison moment. I watch a lot of YouTube videos, and I noticed yesterday that YouTube moved the X. So if anyone out there uses YouTube on your phone and you switch apps and YouTube kind of minimizes the video and continues playing it, over the other application or over your home screen, I noticed the X to close that small video window moved. So they did an upgrade to the app and they adjusted the layout of some of the kind of user interface components. And it just made me immediately think about the fact that if we did that inside of an organization, like you did an upgrade to your LMS or any platform in an enterprise technology, how big a deal would it be that you moved the X to close the video window? And would we launch training about that? Right? Would we have to send emails? Would we confuse people? So I think in a lot of cases, we've added complexity into the technology story that makes it hard for us to keep up and for people to keep up, because again, people have jobs to do. So I think in some cases we layer on our own complexity. And then I think in some cases we get very distracted very quickly by shiny objects. Mm-hmm. So to Joe's point earlier, if you keep the experience of the person that you're trying to provide based on how they do work and what help they need in the middle of the story, and then always focus on the value add and the problems that technology can help you solve, not buzz and hype and excitement and what tools can do. Because as soon as you get stuck in what tools can do, as an enterprise L&D person, I had executives from everywhere show up and say, we should use this kind of technology. And I'm sitting there thinking, where did you even find that?
Right.
So if it's always about the experience of the person, grounded in how work is done and what help they need to do that job, and the value that these tools and investments can provide, I think we'll overcome some of that complexity. But we still have to have a constant conversation, as Joe mentioned, like there's no end to the story. You don't finish your digital infrastructure and architecture. It's a constant focus. So are we also dedicating the right tools and resources to continuing to have the conversation versus making it a project that's got a budget and starts and stops, and then we find ourselves falling behind or kind of become it becomes easier to become a victim to FOMO and that type of stuff. Rambly answer, but that's additional thoughts.
Mm. Thanks. I know that certainly a challenge that we have is politics internally. So sometimes with people having differing agendas, and that can pose a challenge when it comes to consolidating. I don't know if you have experience in that, Joe.
I mean, yeah, we with 3 major divisions and the fact that there's so much technology that was out there before, there's always politics involved. Internally, and I don't know, the challenge. My biggest, what I typically do is I like to listen. So I will listen to and kind of understand where they're coming from and put myself in their shoes, because it helps me really understand where are they coming from, what is the actual what's the resistance, or what is it they're trying to get across, and then I kind of try to work with them to understand where's my in having that discussion with them and saying, okay, I understand you, I hear you. And if I can't have a good discussion with, or if it's not working out, that's where I eventually do pull in the sponsorship sometimes for those types of discussions. But from a politics perspective, it's everywhere. I don't think anybody's immune to that in office politics, but it's, I don't know, it's a lot of it personality. If I try to get along with folks and kind of help understand. And I think that's the part I was talking about before, is understanding where they're coming from. I think helps in that. And then it's, to me, at the end of the day, it's business, and kind of helping them understand it from a business perspective. This is why we're doing this, and I will help you through it, but I need you to come along with me on this journey, because you really don't want me going up to your boss and saying this is what we have to do. I don't say that to them in those words, but I think they kind of get it over time. But that's kind of the approach I usually take, is really working with them to understand where they're coming from and help them along on the journey, and not have to bring the hammer down from someone above.
Yeah, no, definitely. That senior sponsorship is absolutely key. So approaching time on today's session. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us and for your contributions in the chat. It was so interesting, and I learned a lot of takeaways. So I'm sure the audience did as well. But a big thank you to you, JD, for your brilliant kind of hosting. You have a podcast. Do you want to shout out the podcast again?
I will shamelessly plug as many things as you allow me to. But yeah, if you want to hang out with me and super interesting and smart people in the world of kind of workplace employee experience, learning and development, check out In the Know, axonify.com/ITK, or In the Know on your favorite podcast app.
Brilliant. You've definitely got the perfect voice and setup. As we were speaking before this, we went live this morning. You got brilliant setup. But also thank you, Joe, for all your insights. It's been really brilliant. So that's it for session 3 of the final day of the Autumn Forum. But we will be back for our final session at 4 p.m. with Stella Lee talking all about developing AI literacy for L&D. So thank you again for joining us, and see you all in the next session.
Sure. Thank you.